Hello all, welcome to chapter 14, the brain and cranial nerves. Here we'll look at how the brain is organized, protected, and a little bit of blood supply. We're going to look at different functions and how they relate to specific areas. And we'll look at how the organization of this is done, as well as discussing cranial nerves. So the brain. About 97% of the body's neurons, as we saw before, about 85 billion neurons within here. We have passageways for cerebral spinal fluid for the health of the neurons. These will be found in ventricles. 6 major regions with specific functions. We'll see all these. Then conscious thought and intelligence is going to be had in the brain. So a quick look here. The largest part of the brain that we all see in images is going to be known as the cerebrum. And then the second largest area will be the cerebellum. We will have the diencephalon, which makes up more or less the center of the brain. This will contain the thalamus, which is this egg-shaped structure here. The pineal gland in the epithalamus, right here, and then the hypothalamus. We'll see that especially when it comes to the autonomic nervous system. And then we have the brain stem. It's going to have 3 different parts. Okay, starting with the midbrain, then the pons, and then the medulla oblongata. Protection of the brain is a lot like the spinal cord. We have cranial bones for our bony protection. Then we have cranial meninges, the same as with the spinal cord, pia, arachnoid, and dura, although we do have 2 dura mater layers. And then we have a cerebral spinal fluid as well. So here we see the cranial bone, one of them. Okay. And then the dura mater is going to be represented with these green layers. We do, like I said before, we have 2 layers. We have a periosteal layer, which is a layer against the bone, and then the meningeal layer, which is against the arachnoid mater. And then here we have the arachnoid mater, and we see the spider web-like structure where cerebral spinal fluid and blood vessels will be housed. And then directly up against the cerebrum is going to be the pia mater. Okay, extensions of the dura mater, we're going to have 3 major ones. We have the falx cerebri. This will extend from the central portion of the brain and divide the brain into left and right hemispheres, moving towards the center of the brain. Then we have the tentorium cerebelli, seen here. This is a tent-like structure over the cerebellum. Okay, and then the falx cerebelli will divide the 2 hemispheres of the cerebellum. Then a quick look at some blood flow. We have different sinuses, more or less veins. So this is the inferior sagittal sinus. We have the superior sagittal sinus, and we'll drain into a transverse sinus here. And eventually we will make our way to the jugular vein, which we'll see after a bit. So extensions of dura mater, falx cerebri, tentorium cerebelli, and falx cerebelli. Okay, blood flow to and from the brain. Again, we talked about how the drainage is from the sinuses here. We can see another look at them. And then we make our way to the jugular veins. But blood supply is from the internal carotid artery and the vertebral artery. Okay, blood flow, very important. We must have a large amount of oxygen for the brain to continue to live and thrive and function in the way we are supposed to. Deficiency of this can damage or cause death of brain cells. Glucose deficiency, if you've ever been really hungry, you've noticed maybe you're a little confused, a little dizzy. Glucose is the sole energy source for brain, for the neurons in the brain. Ketones can take over, but those are only in starvation-like modes. Blood-brain barrier, we briefly spoke of this. So this is to help protect the brain from harmful substances and pathogens, only allowing certain nutrients and substances through to the brain. So some therapeutic drugs can also be blocked. Cerebral spinal fluid, again, produced in the ventricles, which we'll see here in a little bit. Functions are going to be, we are cushioning the neural structures, so we act as a buoyant cushion. We support the brain because it is similar density. And then we're transporting nutrients, chemicals, and waste products. So again, acting a lot like a different form of blood. Okay, but it is made by ependymal cells from the choroid plexus, which is going to be a collection of blood vessels. Okay, CSF is going to be liquid, obviously. Again, this is just explaining a little more about that. But here we see the ventricles laid out. These blue highlighted structures are lateral ventricles. A left and right lateral ventricle. And then we meet our third ventricle, so we flow from the laterals to the third. And then we flow into the fourth ventricle. And there is a small lateral apparatus here. From there, we will flow into the central canal of the spinal cord as well, and around the spinal cord in the subarachnoid space, as well as around the brain in the subarachnoid space. Okay, so here's an anatomical look at those ventricles. Okay, ventricles are going to contain the CSF. This is where we will see the choroid plexus, which is going to be blood vessels, and they are surrounded by ependymal cells. These ependymal cells will filter the blood to create the CSF. So this is a chart showing the flow in the lateral ventricles, third, fourth, subarachnoid space, and then we reabsorb in the arachnoid villi of the dural venous sinuses. Then we move into those sinuses we spoke of, the inferior, superior, and sagittal and transverse sinuses. And then we will move into the venous blood, to the heart and lungs, where we will return back into the choroid plexus. All right, so we're going to start off with the brain stem. Again, the three areas, medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain. We'll look at a few of their structures as well as functions. So this is where the brain stem is going to have the majority of the cranial nerves extending from this area. Okay, and we'll talk about those. The medulla oblongata is continuous with that spinal cord. One thing that sets it apart is going to be what's known as the decussation of pyramids. This is where tracks will cross from left to right and right to left. This is how the left side controls the right side of the body, and the right side controls the left side of the body. Okay, so a few key features. We are communicating between the brain and the spinal cord, obviously, because it is the main connection. We're going to contain some autonomic centers. So cardiac center, vasomotor, and respiratory. This means we are helping control heart rate and strength of contractions. Vasomotor is going to control dilation and constriction of blood vessels. And then the respiratory rhythmicity center is going to help with respiratory rhythm or our breathing rhythm. Then, of course, structurally, we have decussation of pyramids. Some cranial nerves that are involved are 8 through 12. So vestibulocochlear, this is hearing and equilibrium. Glossopharyngeal, we have some taste and checking the barometric pressure within the blood vessels. Then we have the vagus nerve, many functions there. Accessory is going to control a couple muscles, and hypoglossal will control the tongue. So structurally, pyramids and inferior olivary nuclei. Functional regions, again, heart rate, respiratory rate, vasoconstriction. Then with the vagus nerve, we'll see swallowing, coughing, vomiting, sneezing, and hiccuping. The pons is going to be the enlarged portion of the brainstem. Pons means bridge in Latin. So we are bridging between the medulla, which is containing tracts from the spinal cord. We're also going to help connect the cerebellum to the brain itself, to the cerebrum. So it's a meeting point among all three of these areas of the brain. Cranial nerves in this area are going to be trigeminal, abducens, facial, vestibular branch of the vestibulocochlear. So trigeminal is 5, and then vestibulocochlear is 8. So 5 through 8. Trigeminal is going to have sensation from the face. Abducens is going to be eye movement. Facial will be taste as well as facial movements. And vestibular branch of vestibulocochlear will be involved with equilibrium. Functional regions, we are relaying nerve impulses every which way we can. So related to voluntary skeletal movements from the cerebrum to the cerebellum, so helping coordinate muscle movements. And then respiratory centers. So this is a big respiratory area. We have pneumotaxic and apneustic centers. So we are actually controlling respiration in this area. We're modifying the rhythmicity center activity. So we can tell ourselves to stop breathing. We can automatically tell ourselves to stop breathing, say as if we jumped into a pool. We automatically know to stop breathing, which is good. Then the midbrain, moving closer to the center of the brain. This is going to be connecting the brainstem to the diencephalon, where we will help relay information to and from the brainstem as well as the brain. We have the corpora quadrigemina. This is going to contain nuclei that control visual and auditory reflexes. So we will have automatic reflexes to a sound. If we hear something, most of the time we will automatically turn to see where it is coming from. Substantia nigra, this is where we are inhibiting activity of the basal nuclei by producing dopamine. This is where if we stop producing dopamine, Parkinson's disease takes over. We have the reticular activating system. So part of the reticular formation we'll see, this is going to stimulate, leads to cerebral alertness. So kind of like an alarm clock. Damage to the RAS produces unconsciousness. So if the RAS is damaged, this is where we can go into a coma. So in other words, this is our waking system. Cranial nerves, 3 and 4 for eye movement. Again, some structural. Substantia nigra is the big one. Functional, we're conveying messages to and from the brainstem as well as the brain.